The National Desk, America's News Now.
Funding face-off. Lawmakers still at a stalemate as we head into the holiday break.
This is putting our communities at risk.
To our southern border and the new push to track who's crossing illegally.
It's going to take more money to have those basic requirements in your life.
The American dream in jeopardy for many families trying to build a future. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and we do start with the ongoing funding fight over border security on Capitol Hill. Without reaching a deal on aid for Ukraine and Israel, including protections for the southern border, the Senate will return Monday, delaying its holiday break. Conservative groups and ex-border officials demanding lawmakers to reject all unacceptable border compromises. Democratic and Republican negotiators will be working over the weekend, trying to get something done both sides can agree on before Christmas.
Over the last few days, negotiations on a path forward to getting national security supplemental done have made good progress. As I've said, if we believe something is important and urgent, we should stay and get the job done.
Congress can't fix the Biden administration's weakness on the world stage by ourselves. We can equip a global superpower, but we still need a commander-in-chief who recognizes that he's leading.
The Senate says there should be a vote next week, but any deal needs approval from the House. Meantime, the southern border crisis continues to spiral out of control. A new report saying the Department of Homeland Security lost track of nearly 200,000 illegal immigrants after they were released into our nation. The National Desk, Jordan Elder, has more from San Antonio.
In certain situations, DHS can release migrants into the United States while they wait for their asylum hearing, but they ask for an address to make sure they can still get in contact. However, this report found that some of the addresses were invalid or missing entirely. That means the government may not be able to find thousands of migrants to tell them about court dates or continue the immigration process. What do a restaurant in Maryland, a church in Illinois, and a car dealership in New Jersey have in common? They were all listed as destination addresses for multiple migrants when they were released into the U.S. The only problem, that's not where they ended up.
This is unacceptable. This is putting our communities at risk.
It's the same alarm that the Office of the Inspector General sounded when they analyzed these numbers. From March of 2021 to August of 2022, more than 177,000 migrants provided invalid addresses. 54,000 of those were entirely blank.
How is the administration going to communicate with those individuals to let them know when their cases are off for immigration court?
Ari Jimenez is a retired Homeland Security special agent in charge. He says this report shows that officials weren't validating these addresses, checking for repeats, or paying close attention to trends.
They're never going to be found.
Republican Senator John Cornyn introduced new legislation calling for more transparency about how migrants are handled at the border, citing the high crossings in Texas.
This is also a blinking green light saying to anybody and everybody who has the money to pay the smugglers to bring them to the border, keep coming.
Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar tells us the information in this report is not a new development. He says in a statement that he'll continue to provide the necessary resources DHS personnel need to effectively manage its non-detained docket. The OIG did offer 4 solutions, including a plan for when migrants don't have an address to give, validation of those addresses, more data analysis, and resources. DHS disagreed with all of them. The end of this report announced that as of April 2023, ICE is using a new address form that has built-in verification. It says the entries are cross-checked with sites like Google Maps and the Postal Service. ICE and Border Patrol also have new technology to help coordinate these cases.
Right now, the U.S. is pressing Israel to transition its fighting in Gaza to a smaller, more targeted campaign in the coming weeks. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke about the matter this week with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a meeting in Tel Aviv.
He did talk about possible transitioning from what we would call high-intensity operations, which is what we're seeing them do now, to lower-intensity operations sometime in the near future.
Sullivan also warned Prime Minister Netanyahu that a prolonged conflict would make the Palestinian territory harder to govern after the war. Developing now, a Navy officer who was jailed in Japan over a deadly car crash has returned to the U.S., according to his family. Lieutenant Ridge Alconis had been serving a 3-year prison sentence over a deadly car crash that killed 2 Japanese citizens in 2021. It's unclear where in the U.S. Alconis is heading or whether he will be required to serve any additional time when he arrives. New details on 2 U.S. prisoners being held in Russia. Journalist Evan Gershkovich and Marine veteran Paul Whelan during his annual end-of-year press conference. Russian President Vladimir Putin said he hopes an agreement can be made on a prisoner swap, but that the U.S. had to listen to Russia's conditions. In response, the State Department said Russia hasn't been responsive to its proposals.
We very much want to bring Evan Gershkovich home. We very much want to bring Paul Whelan home. We have put multiple offers on the table. There is one significant offer that we made as recently as a few weeks ago. We have seen those offers rejected every time by the Russian government.
The U.S. government considers both men to be wrongfully detained. The first primary votes in the 2024 presidential election are 1 month away, and a new poll shows many Americans aren't thrilled about a Trump-Biden rematch. According to new data from AP Norc, 58% of U.S. adults would be dissatisfied with Trump as the GOP nominee, while 56% would be dissatisfied with Biden as the Democratic pick. The survey also found 68% of adults are pessimistic about the state of politics in America. Taking a look at your money, food prices are finally rising slower than inflation, but only if you eat at home. Grocery store prices are up just 1.7% for the year. That's much lower than the overall inflation rate of 3.1%. There are still a few aisles where you'll find exceptions, though. Frozen juice is up 18.6%, and beef and veal prices are up 8.7%. The cost of eating out is also still pretty high. Due to rising labor costs, restaurant prices are up 5.3%. New Labor Department data shows the rate of consumer inflation slowed once again. National correspondent Atra Al-Nashar breaks down the numbers and new analysis about the multi-million-dollar cost of chasing the American dream.
Slowly but surely, inflation in the U.S. is getting closer to a level economists consider normal. The yearly rate of consumer inflation fell to 3.1% in November, according to the Labor Department. Core consumer inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy prices, was unchanged at 4%.
We've seen easing inflation while the job market has stayed tight. What does that mean? It means wage growth is beating price growth.
The White House celebrating Americans having more buying power. But in a statement reacting to the new inflation report, President Biden said in part, quote, "Despite this progress, I know many Americans still find too many things unaffordable." A new reading of consumer sentiment from the University of Michigan shows people are starting to feel better about where inflation is headed, but their overall sentiment is still lower than it was before the pandemic. Certainly a political liability for President Biden heading into an election year with low approval ratings of his handling of the economy. A recent CBS poll asked adults about their standard of living compared to what their parents' was at their age. 46% said worse. Only a third said better.
The fact that the cost of living continues to go up year after year, even though inflation is cooling a little bit, just means it's going to take more money to have those basic requirements in your life.
According to an Investopedia analysis, the American dream, aspirational events like throwing a wedding, buying a home, having kids, retiring, costs an estimated $3.4 million over a lifetime. Compare that to Americans' average lifetime earnings of $2.3 million. Becoming a homeowner is especially difficult. With a 10% down payment and roughly 7% interest rate, it will cost almost $800,000, according to Investopedia.
So if you can't own a home and have real estate and then pass that on to future generations, it's really difficult to build generational wealth in your family.
An expensive reality that could put the American dream even farther out of reach for the next generation. In Washington, I'm Atra Al-Nashar for the National Desk, America's News Now.
A trio of top Senate Democrats demanding the federal government require airlines to carry EpiPens on board commercial flights. EpiPens, or epinephrine auto-injectors, treat severe and often life-threatening allergic reactions. Current FAA standards only require airlines carry epinephrine in syringes designed for a cardiac emergency, not the auto-injectors to administer the medication, and this can have deadly consequences.
Inflation cooled again last month to 3.1%. It's a big improvement from November of last year when prices rose at a pace of 7.1% year over year. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. Even though inflation is cooling, some say they're not feeling any relief. Why is that?
It really comes down to your lifestyle and routine, and here's what I mean by that. If you drive to work, for example, you might be struggling more than someone who takes public transit. That's because car insurance costs were up more than 19% last month from a year ago. That's the biggest increase across all goods and services, while public transportation prices were down almost 9%.
It's not just the what, it's also the where.
That's exactly right, Eugene. Some cities have been hit way harder than others. For example, Miami had an annual inflation rate of over 7%, which was the highest out of all the metro areas tracked by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and more than double the national average. Housing costs definitely played a role in that, along with Florida's general population growth. Meanwhile, in Boston and Chicago, prices rose 2.4% and 2.5% from a year ago.
All right, Courtney, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to Courtney's sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com.
Still ahead here on the National Desk, a fossil fuel fight. Why some say the Biden administration's war on oil and gas might crash America's energy. Our Jen Jeffcoat spoke with former economic White House advisor Steve Moore for his take.
He says President Biden's radical green agenda will cripple our global economic leadership, cost our economy millions of jobs, and make you colder in your homes in the winter and hotter in the summer. President Biden announcing several proposals at the climate summit in Dubai that former economic White House advisor Steve Moore says will shut down 60% of America's electric power. Steve joining us this morning. Good morning to you, sir.
Hi, Jan. Good morning.
So President Biden announcing he's going to stop all new coal plants in the U.S. and sharply reduce methane from the oil and gas industry. What does this mean for the future of our electric power?
Well, there were two declarations by the president in the White House last week, Jan. The first had to do with coal, where the president said he wanted to, he was going to shut down all new coal plants in the United States, and then over the next 10 years, shut down our existing coal plants. Well, that's a problem because we get about 20 to 25% of our electric power from coal. So what's going to replace that? And then a few days later, he announced these new very, very tight restrictions on methane. Now, methane is simply a fancy word for natural gas. And so when you take natural gas and you put coal together, because natural gas is about 40% of our power, so you do the math, that means about 60% of our power plants would have to be shut down or discontinued or not built in the first place. That's a really dangerous thing because we don't have anything right now to back it up. We don't have enough nuclear power. There's no way we're going to be able to provide all the power we need with windmills and solar panels. So it's dangerous. One other quick point about this, Jan. You know, China is building dozens and dozens of new coal plants while we're shutting down our coal plants. So if you're concerned about climate change, our shutting down our coal plants will have no effect on the temperature of the planet.
Yeah, how many times has coal saved us also in the past few years, especially when the temperatures get really, really cold or really, really hot?
So that's a great point. So even when we use more solar and wind, which the Biden administration wants to do, you just remember a couple of years ago, we had that polar vortex that went right down the middle of the country, right down all the way to Texas. And so a lot of these solar, panels froze, and so they weren't generating electricity. The wind wasn't blowing, so the windmills weren't working. You need to have coal plants and natural gas plants to back these things up. Look, this country was built on coal. We need to have these coal plants, especially in areas. I'm from Chicago. You can't really use solar power in
Exactly.
Chicago. You don't get it done.
So it might work in some places like California. That state already has seen power outages and blackouts thanks to their statewide green energy regulations. And of course, if you live in certain parts of California, they don't even have air conditioning. I know when I lived in Southern California, most people did not. But in other places in the country, air conditioning is something that, can be very hazardous and dangerous if you don't have it. Is this going to start happening on a national scale, though, what we're seeing in California with these blackouts and with these outages?
It's a really good point you're making, Jan, because you're right. In the last couple of years, we've all seen what's happened in California, where they have rolling brownouts and blackouts because they're running out of electric power, because they're a few steps ahead of where Biden is as a state. And so think about this. If you have those kind of brownouts and blackouts throughout the country, you use the word danger. You're exactly right. How are we going to have enough electric power for our schools, for our factories, for our hospitals, for our technology sectors, the internet? It uses an enormous amount of energy. Yeah. If those shut down, we're in big trouble, not just as an economy, it's a health and safety issue as well. You need reliable sources of energy when you have a $24 trillion industrial economy.
And you can view the full interview with Steve Moore, plus more top stories online all the time at thenationaldesk.com. Still to come, vulnerable vehicles. A social media trend leads to certain cars at risk of break-ins. Plus, inmate improvements. Women in Oklahoma are working to reimagine the justice system, all from behind bars. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We're taking the pulse of America, and we start in North Carolina, where police are investigating a crime spree again, targeting Kia and Hyundai vehicles.
As though Kia and Hyundai vehicles were targets during these break-ins as well.
Last month, we spoke with police about another spree of break-ins they believed were fueled by a social media trend that shows teens how to break into cars, specifically Kias and Hyundais, as defects in their engines allow for easy access. Captain Artemis says the suspects you see here from those break-ins are likely responsible for Sunday's break-ins too.
The fact remains is Kias and Hyundais, especially the year models that are able to be stolen, they're hugely popular cars, and you're going to find them in pretty much any large apartment complex throughout the city.
What makes this case difficult, according to Captain Artemis, is that there's no rhyme or reason to where the suspects are going.
You've got the spree on Long Shoals Road, you have another spree on Sweet Creek Road, but then you have what appears to be completely on the other side of town in West Asheville, a very similar spree.
The driver was swerving so bounced and hit the building a second time.
Lockley posted this photo of the car on his Facebook page.
The vehicle was totaled, and the side of our building had been completely punctured through twice. You start peeling away the bricks and the broken drywall and find that essentially the whole facade of our building on the east side has to be replaced.
Repairs will have the restaurant closed until December 22nd.
It's a big hit. It's a couple of our busiest weeks out of the entire year. So this really, really hurts.
Crashes and other traffic accidents typically go up during the holiday season. So Lockley has this advice for drivers.
Slow down, stay safe. You don't want this to happen to you.
An increased police presence at schools across Montgomery County. This after multiple districts received an email last night claiming to be from Russian terrorists threatening to bomb these schools. Sheriff Streck and other law enforcement say none of the threats were credible and there was no imminent danger for any of the districts. But it's not just the Miami Valley that was impacted. Columbus, Cincinnati, and Cleveland area schools received the same threats, but this has also been happening in other parts of the country.
The FBI was right away able to tell us that last month, California schools received this same email, and then last week, Texas schools received this email.
Centerville and Springboro schools sent the following 2 letters to parents in their districts, warning them of yesterday's threats and urging their parents and students to report anything suspicious immediately.
Up next here on the National Desk, police budget battle. The push from officers in one big city struggling with violent crime to take matters into their own hands. With rising levels of crime in many cities, calls to defund the police that started in 2020 have been replaced by demands for more officers. But in Atlanta, there's a battle over how much the city should invest. The National Desk, Scott Thuman, explains.
Yeah. Does it look damaged? Or
yeah.
It is damaged?
It looked like somebody broke into the house.
Okay.
Policing in Atlanta, Georgia has never been busier and in some ways never more challenged.
Atlanta police, make yourself known if you're inside.
Just look at the numbers. 170 murders last year, the city's highest total since 1996. So far this year, the statistics are better, but the city remains desperate for more cops.
How many officers are you down right now?
Right now we're down about 400 officers.
Darren Shirebaum is chief of the Atlanta Police Department.
We're authorized about 2,035 is what we're authorized at, and we need 400 to get back to that point. We're still the largest law enforcement agency in the state, but we want to be back to that full authorized strength because guess what? In 2026, we're hosting the World Cup.
But attracting new officers has never been harder. When it comes to training, this is what for years Atlanta recruits had to work with. An old school building turned police academy with peeling paint. So city and law enforcement leaders came up with a $90 million plan to turn training around, and they're turning soil to do it at a site just outside Atlanta. Former Secret Service agent Dave Wilkinson leads Atlanta's Police Federation.
If you really want to put people out on the street, that is police officers or firefighters or paramedics, and you want them to be in life-saving roles, you have to make sure they are properly trained.
But what he sees as a state-of-the-art opportunity, others see as a threat. Protesters dubbed the training center Cop City, depicting it as little more than an excuse to further militarize policing in their city. During a series of protests this year, demonstrators broke into the site, destroying construction equipment, setting vehicles on fire, and shooting commercial-grade fireworks at officers. Kamal Franklin is a community activist and one of the leading voices against the project.
What are your biggest problems with what you've called Cop City?
Some of the things that have been planned for this site include urban warfare training, paramilitary grade facilities, mock cities for crowd control.
Wilkinson thinks the majority of people are now firmly behind the police again.
When crime rates started to go up, the residents of any city come together and say, we have got to support the police. So I would argue, or I would say, that right now we see a higher level of support for police than I've seen in all my years of doing this.
Atlanta's police training center is due to open next year, but the protests are still happening. In other cities and states, new police training facilities have opened or are being built because amid rising crime, police departments are struggling to recruit and keep enough officers. For Full Measure, I'm Scott Thuman.
Up next here on the National Desk, machine guns, how people are turning handguns to machine guns with just a tiny piece of plastic or metal. And anthrax outbreak, find out how numerous countries in Africa are dealing with a deadly outbreak. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
Illegal modifications, how guns are being modified to become more dangerous. Accidental overdoses to popular drugs are leading to an increase of calls to poison control centers. Find out the steps manufacturers are now taking. Record output after Russia was hit with sanctions. The U.S. set a record in oil production, but what was the impact? The Fact Check team breaks it down. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and we start with an alarming report showing criminals turning handguns into machine guns. Police say all it takes is $20 or a 3D printer. Spotlight on America's national investigative correspondent Lisa Fletcher has more on how these devices are creating terrifying terrain for police and communities across America.
Gunfire raining down on a school and one of D.C.'s busiest streets. The shooter making this gunfire potentially even more lethal with a tiny piece of metal or plastic you can buy online in seconds that turns a handgun into a machine gun.
You know, the concern is that they're everywhere out there on the streets.
It's called a handgun conversion device, illegal and commonly known as a Glock switch, but it can be installed on many types of guns with devastating consequences. ATF Acting Special Agent in Charge Mike Waddell told us it is a terrifying trend.
We're starting to see a huge increase. Criminal elements are using them against other criminal elements, but also our law enforcement partners.
Body camera footage shows two officers in Texas serving a warrant.
It's Houston Police. Let's do this thing.
In a split second, the suspect hits them with a hail of gunfire from a handgun outfitted with a conversion device. One officer is killed, the other seriously wounded.
Bill.
In 2020, ATF seized more than 4,000 weapons with conversion devices. In just 1 year, that number increased by more than a third to nearly 6,000. These modified weapons have killed and injured dozens of people at a time in mere seconds in cities across the country. Sacramento, Fresno, Milwaukee, Detroit, and Houston, just some of the latest. In 2022, in the District of Columbia, a lone shooter who, according to ATF, had at least one weapon outfitted with a conversion device, plunged schools and a neighborhood into a terrifying lockdown for hours as he sprayed bullets from a fifth-floor apartment. 4 people were injured.
It increases that capability of that suspect, by, just the possession and the use of this, handgun conversion device.
In fact, it allows the shooter to fire up to 600 rounds from a handgun in 1 minute. We arranged a demonstration with DC's ATF experts. In less than 2 seconds, I fired 15 rounds from a 9mm handgun.
How easy is it to swap out for one of these switches?
It's a fairly easy process, so a matter of less than a minute, you can have one switched out and ready to utilize the firearm.
Firearms Enforcement Officer Nicholas Campbell explained how it works.
It's pushing down on your actual trigger bar, keeping it from resetting, and that's what's causing it to fire automatically.
We were able to find these illegal gun modifiers openly for sale for anywhere from $20 to $200 on multiple social media platforms, including Facebook, TikTok, and Telegram, all of which forbid weapons transactions. Waddell says it's no mystery who's making these purchases.
Typically what we find is that someone that's not going through the process to necessarily register a Glock switch or to make it legal, that they're using it for criminal or nefarious purposes.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Lisa Fletcher.
The National Rifle Association blasting the Biden administration over a plan to change rules, saying it will demolish our Second Amendment rights. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms wants all gun sellers and buyers to get a federal license for any transaction. The gun rights group releasing a statement saying in part, this rule blatantly disregards the recent NRA-backed Bruin ruling on the Second Amendment. It also creates serious confusion among lawful gun owners who buy and sell firearms legally for various purposes, from collecting to self-defense. Emergency room visits for COVID-19, flu, and RSV have collectively reached their highest levels in the U.S. since February. Among the 3 viruses, COVID continues to be the biggest driver of hospitalizations. Hospitals reported more than 22,000 new COVID admissions the week ending December 2nd, the highest since peaking in September. The CDC says levels of respiratory illnesses are high across most of the South, plus New York and New Jersey. Health officials are urging people to get vaccinated. Right now, 5 countries in Africa experiencing outbreaks of anthrax. Anthrax is a rare but serious disease caused by bacteria found naturally in soil. It usually affects domestic and wild animals, but humans can be infected if exposed. The World Health Organization says there have been more than 1,100 suspected cases and 20 deaths this year. WHO says the cases were reported in Kenya, Malawi, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Seasonal outbreaks are normal, but officials say it's notably worse this year, especially in Zambia. Another health scare closer to home. Poison control centers in the U.S. are getting more calls about accidental overdoses of a popular weight loss and diabetes drug. Janae Bowens reports.
Now, this catchy jingle is for the diabetes medicine Ozempic. It's a brand of semaglutide that many celebrities use to lose weight.
My doctor, my anti-aging doctor, just hands it out to anybody, right? I didn't even know I was on it.
Semaglutide is also sold as Wegovy for weight loss. And we're now seeing more people accidentally overdosing. From January through November, poison centers reported nearly 3,000 calls involving semaglutide. That's a more than 15-fold increase since 2019.
Because there's been so much demand, there's been a shortage.
Dr. Anand Parekh, chief medical advisor for the Bipartisan Policy Center, says the demand is a big factor in the accidental overdoses.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of fake and counterfeit medication around, so that's the first. Secondly, some pharmacies are compounding or making this on their own, and unfortunately, when they do so, sometimes they incorrectly dose the medicine. Sometimes they add additional ingredients.
Ozempic and Wegovy's manufacturer is suing 2 pharmacies for copycat drugs.
Even if the medication, if it's the actual patented medication, you receive it in an auto-injector pen, and people can incorrectly auto-inject that and get the wrong dose.
The American College of Medical Toxicology reports an overdose case out of New York that involved the patient accidentally taking 20 times the recommended amount. Now, some signs of a semaglutide overdose include dizziness, chills, impatience, fatigue, seizures, and confusion. Reports show the manufacturer of Ozempic and Wegovy say they are taking multiple steps to ensure responsible use of their semaglutide medicines. In Washington, I'm Janae Bowens.
New details using psychedelic drugs to treat PTSD is gaining support. The MAPS Public Benefit Corporation is asking the FDA to review MDMA along with therapy as a treatment for the disorder. MDMA is the active ingredient in street drugs like ecstasy and Molly, and researchers say it can produce experiences of emotional relatedness and openness. The FDA has 60 days to accept or deny the review. The largest pharmacy chains in the U.S. now accused of handing over your personal medical records to law enforcement without warrants. Lawmakers sent this letter to Health and Human Services demanding answers after the congressional investigation found patients were not notified of these disclosures. They say CVS, Health, Kroger, and Rite Aid instructed pharmacists to respond to law enforcement requests immediately, while Amazon, Cigna, Optum Rx, Walmart, and Walgreens require legal professionals to review requests before responding, but don't require warrants unless state law mandates it. Retailers across the country are losing billions of dollars to organized retail crime. The issue is top of mind for lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Our Janae Bowens explains.
Scenes like these have become commonplace in our nation's suburbs and cities.
Detergent, lotion, a lot of products are being used and sold. You can talk about human trafficking, you can talk about terrorism. That money definitely goes elsewhere.
Sacramento County Sheriff Jim Cooper is doing what he can to stop organized retail crime, but he says he needs help.
There's a lot of international folks involved in this.
The problem was the focus on Tuesday at a House Homeland Security hearing.
Do you think having maybe a billionaire like George Soros spending $40 million of his own money, supporting leftist prosecutors and DAs who are soft on crime might have something to do with it?
Republicans blame Democrat policies on crime and the border for the issue, but not all witnesses agreed.
Any trends there?
But there was shared disappointment when it came to the safety concerns these criminals pose, some store workers even losing their lives.
You will sense the fear and the trauma and how much impact this has on human beings.
Today, we're locking up valuable product, employing off-duty police and security officers, and even putting police cars on the front aprons of our stores.
The latest retail security survey shows in 2022, retailers lost over $112 billion. That's up from $93.9 billion in 2021. Organized retail crime is partly to blame.
And when stores start closing due to the effects of ORC, we see loss of jobs,
We see loss of state and local sales tax generated and loss of property tax generated. And of course, it's a blight on the community.
A bipartisan group of lawmakers and retail industry leaders are pushing for the passage of the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act. It would establish coordination between several agencies to stop this wide-scale theft. In Washington, I'm Janae Bowens.
The 13.2 million barrels of oil the U.S. is producing per day is not only a record output for the country, it also accounts for the most in the world. I'm with Courtney from the Fact Check team. Last December, in response to the war in Ukraine, G7 nations in the EU imposed some sanctions on Russian crude oil. Have those worked?
It really depends how you look at it. A report from the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air found that the sanctions did cost the Kremlin almost $37 billion in export revenue. That's around 2 months of earnings, but that's way less than expected, and the impact was the most intense during the first half of the year, peaking in the first quarter, mostly because of a lack of monitoring and enforcement.
Now, there's also what's known as the refining loophole. Help us understand what that is exactly.
That's right, there is. Essentially, it allows Russian oil to be laundered through third-party countries and sold in countries that impose sanctions, like the U.S., as gasoline or other petroleum products. And it's technically legal because there's no real restriction on importing fuel from other countries, even if Russian oil has been used in its production.
So what's going to be the next move here?
It's tough to know for sure, but there are a few possibilities, like lowering the price cap to $30 a barrel, for example, or prosecuting anyone involved in bypassing the restrictions on Russian energy in general. EU countries are also discussing ways to tighten enforcement, including requiring traders and ships to provide data on oil shipments.
All right, Courtney, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to Courtney's sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit us at thenationaldesk.com.
Our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from President Biden's business deals to protests on college campuses.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day to report on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The Bureau's correspondents are here to share their insights on the stories they've been covering. A ton of news this past week regarding President Biden and investigations into his family's business deals. National correspondent Christine Frizzau, you've been following this story for years. Sort out the latest developments for us.
Yeah, just in the last couple of weeks, Steve, we've seen Hunter Biden receive a second federal indictment, this one for 6 misdemeanor and 3 felony tax offenses. It follows his first indictment that he got in September for lying on an application to purchase a firearm. These charges, actually, he and his attorney are now fighting back against. But of course, some of the biggest news in the past week was the fact that the House was able to get enough votes, all Republicans, of course, to authorize a formal impeachment inquiry. They say that they haven't been able to get access to documents and other information because it wasn't official. Well, now it is official. They believe they're going to have a little bit of legal backing to move forward on some of these questions that they've had. Now, connecting Joe Biden to Hunter Biden. This is where a lot of people get confused. And I think at the nucleus, really, of the impeachment inquiry is Hunter Biden's business dealings and this question. What was he selling to get all these millions of dollars? Well, House Republicans say he was selling access to his father during the time his father was serving as vice president. But since then, even since becoming president, they say that Joe Biden has repeatedly lied about it and that his White House has stymied investigations into all of this and into really getting to the bottom of this.
And of course, the president will be answering a lot of questions about this going into his re-election campaign next year, 2024, just like the former president and likely Republican nominee Donald Trump will be having to answer a lot of questions about his legal issues as well. We'll be watching both of those very closely. Meanwhile, as the Israel-Hamas war rages on, more warnings about possible terror attacks abroad and here in the U.S. National correspondent Atra El-Nashar, what have you learned?
Steve, so the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the National Counterterrorism Center put out this updated public service announcement this week that says the tensions over the Israel-Hamas conflict have heightened the risk for violence carried out by lone actors here in the United States. They say that public gatherings would be likely targets throughout the winter. We're talking not just protests or First Amendment protected events related to the conflict, but also holiday gatherings, faith-based gatherings. We saw Attorney General Merrick Garland this week talk about how he's instructed U.S. attorneys to reach out to local law enforcement in their districts, to community leaders in their districts, to talk about what they're actually seeing on the ground firsthand and the resources they need from the DOJ to help keep their communities safe. And something, Steve, that this PSA said could further increase the risk for violence is if the Israel-Hamas conflict were to escalate even further, or if there's a significant act of violence here in the U.S. that could inspire retaliatory or copycat attacks.
And another issue related to the Israel-Hamas conflict, creating a lot of controversy, colleges' responses or lack thereof to protests on their campuses. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, tell us about the backlash some of these colleges are getting from Washington.
Yeah, so this all goes back to last week's congressional hearing where the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and UPenn were brought to Capitol Hill to answer questions about how they're combating anti-Semitism on their campuses. A lot of lawmakers were not happy with the answers that they gave. They saw them as fumbling answers on whether the genocide of Jews counts as is against the university's codes of conduct. That was a big sticking point that people latched onto. We're seeing the fallout of that hearing now. The president of Harvard came out with an apology. The president of UPenn coming out with her own apology, although it wasn't enough to keep her job. She did lose that over the weekend. Harvard's president, though, will keep her job for now, and it appears MIT's president will as well. And then now people are zeroing in on the funding. These schools, even though they're private schools, receive a lot of federal funds through tax breaks, through direct federal funding, and through federal student loans. For Harvard, that number tallies into the billions every year. And that's something Congress has control over. And now Senator Rick Scott from Florida wants a bill that he's introducing to pull that funding from any school that says they don't address anti-Semitism on their campus. And we're also seeing the Department of Education continue their investigation into some of these schools where investigate these allegations of rising incidents of not just anti-Semitism, but also anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, and all kinds of discrimination. So they added 6 more schools to that list today. Steve.
Kayla, Audra, Christine, as always, great reporting. Thank you for your hard work. Back to you.
Still to come, commuters caught off guard. Find out why a bridge was suddenly closed in Rhode Island. And paying it forward, how a deli is helping those in need. The National Desk reporters are in your neighborhoods, coast to coast, covering issues that matter to you. We're taking the pulse of America. We start in Rhode Island and the critical failure of a bridge that suddenly shut down. It has many drivers questioning how the problem got so bad without anyone noticing.
Caught it before it became a catastrophe.
Closing the bridge in the face of a failure with a steel pin that holds a beam in place. The pins in question go back 55 years. So how was the problem not caught before it reached this critical point? Rhode Island DOT Director Peter Alvini.
Those pins were inspected on a regular basis. It's something that we did attend to. We knew that they were old. However, as I said, old structures tend to fail more rapidly once they begin to go.
Alvini says an inspection of that part of the Washington Bridge in July did not show any problems. The discovery of the big problem with the 2-foot-long pin was made Friday by an engineer working on the ongoing reconstruction of the westbound side of the bridge that started 2 years ago. But Alvini says the area where the problem is not part of the work that's been done so far.
It is a tale spawned by the TikTok generation, which has spread over social media, the Hyundai hack, Kia-related crimes. Is this a public safety threat?
This is a public safety threat.
That's why Seattle City Council member Lisa Herbold, in one of her last acts as an elected official, sponsored a resolution to urge the feds to recall certain Kia and Hyundai models, saying the car makers are not doing enough on their own.
These particular makes and models that don't have the anti-theft devices are typically the low-end models, which means that it's most likely people of limited means who are having their vehicles stolen.
The joy of the holidays comes with a harsh reality. Many people might go hungry this year.
All around here, everyone needs help.
According to Feed the Children, a nonprofit organization focused on alleviating hunger, almost 13% of U.S. households are facing food insecurity. That fact is the reason why Raven's Deli, located in Armona, started its Pay It Forward meal program.
Someone walks in, they say that they're hungry, they're going to get a ticket.
Marlene Raven and her daughter-in-law, Carrie, decided to start this meal program at their family restaurant 2 weeks ago. They put up signs reading, "If you are hungry and have no money, these meals have been paid for in advance." And it's not just locals.
People were calling in saying, I'd like to buy some tags to put on there. Family members were calling in, buying tags, and even people that were coming in when they were seeing it, they were immediately buying tags for it.
Now they plan on offering this Pay It Forward meal program well into the new year, as long as it's needed in the community.
Still ahead here on the National Desk, a generous donation. Find out how Taylor Swift is helping victims devastated by a recent tornado. The megastar, just named Time Magazine's Person of the Year, has donated $1 million to a relief fund to help victims of the recent devastating and deadly Tennessee tornadoes. Taylor Swift moved to the state as a teen with her family to pursue her music career. The Swifts settled in the Nashville suburb of Hendersonville. That, along with Gallatin and Madison, is still cleaning up from the late Sunday tornado with peak winds of 125 miles per hour. Officials say the tornado outbreak killed 6 people and left thousands homeless. And that is going to do it for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.